It usually begins with confidence. Not quiet confidence. Not the sort that waits, observes, and politely reassesses, but the loud, chest-forward, flag-adjacent confidence that says, I know where I am, I know how this works, and I am absolutely certain I will be explaining things shortly. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. For many American patriots arriving in the United Kingdom, this confidence is not a feeling. It is luggage. They bring it with them, carefully packed between expectations and assumptions, ready to be unpacked the moment Heathrow disappoints them by functioning. Because somewhere between the flight announcement and passport control, a quiet belief takes hold. That Britain is familiar, that it's essentially America, but older, smaller, and in need of correction. This belief does not survive long. The first collision often happens in the queue. Americans queue, of course, but Brits queue with purpose, silently, emotionlessly. As though the queue itself is a sacred national institution, one that predates Parliament and will outlive the monarchy. The American patriot, accustomed to friendliness as an entry requirement, smiles, cracks a joke, mentions the weather. The British response is polite, brief, and utterly non-committal. Not rude, not warm, just enough to confirm that conversation has been acknowledged and will not be continued. Already, something feels off. Then there's the accent. The American ear, trained on films and television, expects clarity. Instead, it encounters regional dialects that appear to have been invented minutes ago by people who refuse to repeat themselves. London lulls them into false security. Manchester removes it. Liverpool finishes the job. By the time someone from Glasgow speaks, the American patriot begins nodding thoughtfully, smiling with the intensity of someone who understands absolutely nothing but is determined not to show it. This is usually when history enters the conversation, uninvited, unnecessary, and catastrophically misjudged. The American patriot loves history, especially when it ends in 1776. They speak of it proudly. Liberation, freedom, tea-related disputes. The British response is calm, mildly interested, as if listening to a distant relative explain a phase they went through at university. There is no outrage, no defensiveness, just a quiet acknowledgement that yes, that did happen, and no, it does not come up very often. This lack of emotional engagement is unsettling. In America, patriotism is worn, displayed, announced. In Britain, it's hidden somewhere between sarcasm and tea preferences. Flags are rare. National pride exists, but it is expressed through complaining about trains and insisting that this year's summer was quite decent, actually. The American patriot searches for affirmation, for agreement, for applause. Instead, they find a pub. Ah yes, the pub, the place where confidence goes to die. The American expects enthusiasm, a lively exchange, perhaps even admiration. What they receive is a calm, neutral greeting and a question they were not prepared for. What'll you have? There is no menu explanation, no recommendations, no storytelling. The American asks for a familiar beer. The bartender stares briefly, not unkindly, but with the expression of someone calculating whether this is worth addressing. A pint arrives, warm, or at least not aggressively cold. The American patriot hesitates. This is not how beer is supposed to feel. It tastes different. Not bad. Just not trying very hard to impress, much like Britain itself. Conversation begins cautiously. Politics comes up, as it always does. The American patriot explains, confidently, passionately, with volume. The pub listens, quietly, patiently. No one interrupts. No one challenges. No one agrees. When the American finishes, expecting reaction, the response is gentle. Oh right, that's it. Not disagreement. Not approval. Just the verbal equivalent of closing a book and placing it back on the shelf. This is deeply confusing, because British disagreement is subtle. It hides behind understatement, sarcasm. A perfectly timed, interesting. The American patriot does not recognize these as warning signs. They continue. At this point, the British humor reveals itself. Not loud, not obvious, not safe. Jokes are delivered deadpan, with no facial expression, and often at the speaker's own expense. The American waits for the punchline. It never comes. The joke has already happened. They just weren't invited. Elsewhere, expectations continue to collapse. Distances are shorter than expected. Public transport works too well to complain properly. People apologize for things they did not do. The American patriot, raised on exceptionalism, begins to sense something unsettling. No one is impressed. Not by volume, not by confidence, not by certainty. In Britain, certainty is suspicious. Anyone who speaks too confidently is assumed to be wrong, joking, or selling something. The American approach, Direct, assertive, enthusiastic lands awkwardly. British communication is coded, indirect, polite to the point of emotional concealment. A British not bad could mean excellent. A British fine could mean deeply unhappy. And a British, with all due respect, means absolutely none. The American patriot attempts to adapt. They lower their voice. They try sarcasm. They even complain about the weather. Progress is made. But then comes the ultimate test, self-awareness. British humor is self-deprecating, relentless. No one is above mockery, especially themselves. When the American patriot speaks proudly of national greatness, the room shifts slightly. Not in anger, in discomfort, because pride, unexamined, feels strange here. The British have spent centuries perfecting the art of pretending they're not impressed by anything, including themselves. By the end of the trip, something changes. Not always visibly, not dramatically, but the confidence is quieter now. The statements have softened, the assumptions have cracks. The American patriot does not leave Britain defeated. They leave, adjusted, aware that the world is not waiting to be impressed, that not everyone wants to be convinced, that sometimes being loud is not strength, and being quiet is not weakness. They board the flight home with fewer answers and better questions, and Britain, as ever, says nothing about it. It never needed to, but this collision does not end at the airport. Because once American patriots return home, something peculiar happens. They try to explain Britain. They struggle. How do you describe a country where sarcasm replaces sincerity, where politeness hides judgment, and where the most devastating insult is delivered politely, quietly, and with a smile? They speak of the humor first. How no one laughs when they should. How jokes feel like tests you didn't study for. They mention the confidence, or lack of it. The way people apologize for winning. The way success is downplayed like an embarrassing secret. And then comes the uncomfortable realization that not being the center of the world felt strange, but also oddly freeing. In part 2, the collision deepens, because this time, the culture shock isn't about accents or pubs or politeness. It's about identity, about what happens when certainty meets subtlety, when patriotism meets irony, and when confidence finally learns how to listen. And that is where it gets truly interesting. Back in America, the patriot tries to recount the experience. They speak loudly, they gesture, they emphasize. And yet, somehow, the subtlety of British understatement is lost in translation. They tell friends about the pubs. The friends nod, slightly confused. Pints? They ask. Yes, pints, the patriot insists. But they're not trying hard. They speak of the humor, the sarcasm, the relentless self-deprecation. And then comes the shock. Friends don't understand. They ask, earnestly, but why weren't they impressed? And the patriot can only shrug. Because the truth is, they weren't supposed to be impressed. The American patriot realizes something profound. In Britain, life does not revolve around ego. Confidence is tempered. Excess is quietly mocked. And every grand gesture is received with a polite, interesting. It's an entirely new form of humility, and it's bewildering. Then comes the final collision. The patriot attempts to follow British etiquette. They apologize unnecessarily. They queue like a monk in silent contemplation. They attempt sarcasm. They even lower their voice. And it works, to a degree. They are no longer a walking, flag-waving disruption. They blend. But they also notice something alarming. Britain does not rush. There is no need to dominate the conversation. Decisions are deliberated, not announced. And the loudest voice is rarely the one that matters. This is unsettling for a patriot trained to lead, to shine, to explain. Yet it is oddly comforting, because here they learn patience, humility. And just like that, the loud confidence that once defined them begins to soften. Just enough to survive British understatement. The lesson is simple and quietly devastating. Sometimes the world does not need to hear your patriotism. Sometimes it prefers you wait, watch, and wonder. And in that quiet space, the collision between expectation and reality finally sinks in.